It was something I don't know. I don't remember either, but then it was processed with some kind of effect, obviously. Or you did. You processed it with some kind of effect.
Yeah. There's multiple echoes, and then it fades
Yeah.
out and
Okay.
fades in. So there's the same one.
I like it too. I like that noise. Yeah.
Hello and welcome to the QUACKCAST. This is QUACKCAST number 589. I'm Ozone Ocean, and with me today is Tance Serene. Hi, Tance. How you going?
Hello.
You didn't even do the voice.
Oh, I didn't.
No, it's Baines. Tance has some issue with her computer. And Pitface is off and about. They're both following. So Tance is doing the B story, and Pit is doing the C story. Baines and I, we're on the A story. So you're following the A at the moment, and it'll all come together in the end.
But now people are going to be waiting to cut away to Tance and Pitt to see what they're up to. I don't think we're going to do that. You're stuck on the A train. You must take the A story train.
Exactly, yeah, and there's just there's no sound on their part, so unfortunately that their part of the story is all visual, so we can't include it in the QUACKCAST. Sorry.
Right.
Yeah, bugger. So this week we're talking about the idea of A stories and B stories and C stories and D stories, or just A stories. We're talking about the idea of multiple threads or one thread in stories and the benefits and the merits of that and different examples of it. So yeah, that's our topic. First, we got to get into the featured comic. So I'm going to talk about the feature now, and my feature this week was Shadowborn. So I will now tell you about Shadowborn. Hello, I'm Ozone Ocean, and my feature for the week was Shadowborn. Zadie is a precocious little monster of an 8-year-old girl. She's excitable and eager to prove herself, especially now she's come into her special powers of destruction as a Shadowborn. It wasn't entirely unexpected. She grew up in the underworld with her ferocious mother and Death himself as somewhat of a mentor. So it's not surprising that with such an unusual upbringing, strange things would happen. Let's just hope she can save her dad from a monstrous grass demon. The story is a supernatural comedy. It's a pretty unusual premise, with the little girl as the main protagonist. The art is bold, ambitious, and quite stylized. It's also a bit rough and naive in places, but its creativity and unique characterizations of Zadie and her mum perfectly balance that out. So have a read of this. It's called Shadowborn, and it's by a person called Gunpowder Rum. And it's rated T for teen. And that was the feature, which was Shadowborn. Okay, so next up, we are now talking about the featured music. This week, Gumwallace has given us the theme to Backwards. It's a folksy, calming journey into dark green, misty warm depths and golden lit fields in afternoon sun, an acoustic driven piece with the pleasing sounds of plucked wire strings. So take it away, Gumwallace, with Bookwoods. was Bookwords, which is a comic by QUACKCAST, and it's rated E for everyone. Alright, so we're talking about A and B stories, and C stories and D stories, and just A stories. So it follows this is a naming convention for the threads. If you have one thread, it's an A story. So if you only have one thread, it's an A regardless of how many threads or how few threads. 2 stories, A and B, 3, just whatever. You get what I mean. If you have more than 26, well, then it has to be alphanumeric.
Yes. I hope everybody out there has your calculators ready, because I just realized this is going to be complex.
Oh, yeah. Jesus Christ. You'll need a logarithmic scale for this stuff. I'm telling you.
Yeah, this is the math. Yeah, you cross the A and B and the C and the D.
Logically, well, I would say logically, no one's going to do that many, but I would be wrong. There's obviously people out there who have exceeded that. I don't know how many story threads Amelius has, but I think it's more than 10. I'm pretty sure.
Oh.
There's a crap load in there. So,
I mean, when a comic goes for a long time and it's got tons of characters and it's sort of this ongoing thing, they could just expand and expand.
Yeah, like say with my comic, it's been going on for a long time, but there's only like 130 pages or something. It's not that many pages, but I only follow like very few amount of characters, and then it's episodic with mine. So, and with yours too. Like we have chapters, episodes, and then we stop, and then we go to another one. Say with Charby the Vampire, I'm pretty sure there's none of that. It just goes on one continuous thing. So that way, when you create new stories with these characters, it doesn't stop and start. Oh, this is Kevin's adventure. This is Maya's adventure. Those are sub stories within the main story. So that's why she keeps getting more and more and more, which is a really unique and interesting thing to do, actually. So there is that, and they're not all concurrent. They don't all happen at the same time as everything else, because those stories can develop and then stop while the others continue, which is, quite a... I think soaps do this as well, don't they? Like
soap operas?
Yeah. Traditional soap.
Yeah.
They don't... They just go on perpetually with... the storyline developing, stop, while these other storylines, are sort of randomly going through. And where else...
Yeah, you can cut away for months or cut away for a year. Yeah. Then you come back to, what's happening with Bo and Hope? That's how I know.
Those are actual soap characters. Taints did not make those up. Well, you actually get it. I'm thinking in, the modern trend for stories now is to have your episodic story. This is like in a drama series, and your larger arc. In the old days, you didn't have a larger arc. You just had the episodic stuff. So now they are following that same kind of thing. So we'll have the episode with like the A, B, or C story, maybe a D, whatever. Then we'll have the larger arc with its own A, B, and C story that, they can sometimes go... This story will go for 3 episodes over the course of the arc, or maybe it will, go for the entire arc or whatever. So they follow that kind of, what would you call it? Like a superior, an uber level of arcing? I'm not sure.
I'm not totally sure either. I mean, I definitely think there's a decompression, like a soap opera approach that's happening a lot more with newer shows. I've seen it in what there was of Star Trek Picard that I watched. It was there. And I've heard about the rest of it, of the rest of season 1 and all of season 2. I didn't want to keep watching. But what I understand from what people are saying, it's like very much a soap opera kind of approach. It's like you sort of set loose you set all these stories in motion, you set all these ideas in motion, and it's kind of, I don't know, that eventually it all ends. Because you're like, okay, there's 10 episodes, so in episode 10 it all ends. But it's not really, not super coherent. It's like very loosey-goosey kind of. And
well, yeah, I think that is an example of bad writing. Not because it's a soap opera approach, but because the writers just can't handle A, B, and C stories on that level.
Because it's a great way for a late, like A, B, C, D stories are a great way. It's a crutch, for good or bad. It's a handy way if someone is a lazy writer. I'm not talking about Picard now, just in general terms. Like if, you're like, oh, we just want to set all these things in motion and then we can kind of do whatever we want with them kind of thing. And like a bajillion ideas and but it's kind of nothing is particularly coherent. So it's like, maybe I am talking about Picard, but it is sort of the opposite of the super rigid kind of approach where it's, old sitcoms would be very mapped out, like with a very rigid structure, versus this like very loose, very and then you get to the end of the season, it's like, well, that could have been 2 episodes. Story,
Yeah, just wrap the damn thing up, not expand it across the whole bloody series. Well, say your favorite shows, Better Call Saul. I haven't seen it, but if it follows the pattern of don't tell me, please don't tell me it was Breaking Bad, yeah. If it follows the pattern of Breaking Bad, then it too follows that wider season arc, ABC, as well as episodic stuff. And it is, if it again goes by the pattern of Breaking Bad, then it is rather tight and very well written.
It's
Am I right?
Insanely well written. It's top tier writing.
Oh, there we are. So
and it's definitely realized, but the episodes do stand alone, but it's not like you watch the old like Star Trek: The Next Generation. They were standalone episodes, right?
Yeah.
And you would, by the end of each episode, for the most part, nothing has changed, and you're back to, with your next episode, you're picking up from the same spot with all the characters. These shows are very much a serialized experience, and so there's a larger arc, like you say. There's also a standalone. The episodes do stand alone in a way, but it's at a deep level. It's at a character level. Events kind of inch forward. You end up, you start at G and you end at HIJ. Series, okay, we've moved forward. Better Call Saul in particular inches forward. It's the slowest burn of slow burns. Very much a character study, and it's sort of inches along. But yeah, stuff has changed by the end. It's usually on a deeper level, on a character level, and then once in a while they'll hit you with something huge and it's shocking.
It sounds amazing. Well, that Breaking Bad was an excellently written story, so I can imagine that Better Call Saul is even better.
Interestingly, with the ABCDs of it, this topic, Better Call Saul is much more an ensemble. Breaking Bad had its multiple story threads, of course, but it was mostly Walter in A position.
Oh, okay.
Usually B, I would say, in B position, right? His B stories. Sometimes they would switch, and often they'd be together too. But and then you'd have the multiple. Of course, you'd follow Hank, the cop, and Skyler, Walter's wife, and the home life, and then the criminal side with whatever villain it was, whether Gus Spring or whatever.
Tuco.
But it's a lot more like sort of co-leads. Like you have the sort of the Saul track, and you have the Mike track, and as it goes on, you have the Kim track, comes along a little bit later, maybe. She's a major character, and you have this guy Nacho. You're following him a lot. And it's a lot more evenly spread. You don't know that it's going to be it's going to be mostly Saul, and then the B story will be Mike or something like that. Right. Sometimes. But it's like a lot more unpredictable like where the weight is going to be. And I mean, it's so well done, you don't even really think about it unless you make yourself think about it.
Yes, well, that's where the good writing comes into it. Then you don't think about A and B and C stories when it's done so well.
Yeah, in the moment kind of thing. Yeah.
And it's not stuck in a formula of that the way, say, American Dad is, or Family Guy, something like that, where that is in a rigid format because, you know, they do so many of these damn things, and it's a lot easier to write stuff if you have a formula to write it to, a formula that works.
It's you know, it's living within a structure, so it's in a way challenging, but in a way I think you're right, it is easier because there's boundaries. And you see some shows, like some great shows, like I was going to write a news post on this actually at some point, but those boundaries disappear. Like, oh, there's no commercials. You just tell your story. And no, it doesn't have to be just 45 or 42 or 41 or 19 minutes long. It can be anywhere. If it's a comedy, it should be, you know, maybe it's 20 minutes, maybe it's 40 minutes.
Yeah.
And seen some great shows like really crash and burn with that lack of structure. They go, this is just running way too long. I'm bored. I'm not laughing. I'm just like checking my watch, which I can't even do now because we don't know how long this frickin' episode is even anymore.
Yeah, is it a 20-minute episode or a 40-minute episode? We're just going to have to spin the chambers and find out.
Now, for a great show, that's great. Better Call Saul has that freedom to be. It has commercial breaks, but it's not really written completely to commercial breaks, I don't think.
Yeah.
Maybe it is. I don't know. I think I read somewhere that the writers still do stick to that format because it's handy. Like the scene one, like the 7 scenes or however many act breaks you have with the commercials or whatever. Okay. But
wow.
I think they do. They're allowed to be, you know, they'll often be 10 minutes longer, 20 minutes longer, or maybe not 20, but sometimes they'll be like substantially longer episode to do what they want to do, which for a good show, that's great. You know, they can do everything they want to do.
Yeah, there's so many reasons that they don't have to do that now. You know, the digital format means that it don't have to be on a timeline of broadcast TV. And when they are on broadcast TV, now the standards have been loosened because they have faced up to the reality of digital delivery, that they will, you know, they're prepared to stick other things into that remaining time. They don't have to stick to their broadcasting schedule the way they used to have to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Which was a very, very, very strict format. Certain number of ads, then we go to the next thing. So yeah, boundaries and the lack of them. But what?
So that's a dramatic structure on shows and everything.
Yeah. So what about, say, in your own experience of writing and reading comics with A stories and B stories?
Well, comics are, I mean, like web comics are now, and maybe like soap operas. A lot of the stuff I read would be very much that way. Like it's sort of, you set these things in motion. You have a basic format, and this thing just goes forever until nobody's reading it anymore, and it eventually gets canceled, I guess. Or it just, you know, it has it rises and falls, but like an issue comes out every month, and it often, I mean, it could be a complete story, or it could be like this decompressed, just part of the story with a cliffhanger. I mean, they would often have cliffhangers, like next issue. You have to find out, you know, how they get out of it, whatever. Or they'd finish the story, and then there'd be a teaser for the next adventure or whatever.
In my own writing, like, oh, sorry, go on.
Oh yeah, or you'd have like Archie. I read Archie, and those were very much standalone, status quo at the beginning to the end. It's just like, you know, nothing changes at the end of the story. It's just read them in any order; it doesn't matter.
How many threads do they have in a story?
they could do whatever they wanted. Like it could be a 1 panel gag, or it could be maybe a 12. I don't know what their longest stories were. I think they had a series. I believe it was Life with Archie or something, where they tell more involved stories and longer stories, and they'd go longer. They would usually. I can't say usually. I haven't read enough really, but they could often cut back if it's a longer story. Like we were saying, it's handy to be able to cut back to other characters and see what they're up to. A little joke, a little funny thing going on. I want to say they were usually just an A story though.
Yeah, that's from my experience, because I haven't read Archie for decades and decades since I was a little kid, but I do remember, like in the really old ones, it was mainly an A story, and like you say, sometimes they would have a B story, but it was just limited to, mentioning like 1 panel kind of stuff or gag stuff. But it's usually just a single thread. Comics like, again, from when I was little, DuckTales? I don't know. Like, the Scrooge McDuck kind of stuff. Whatever those comics were called. I can't remember.
Uh-huh.
Following the whole Duck family. The most they would have is an A and a B story when you're following the baddies with the I can't remember what they are. They've got the black masks on their eyes. Beagle Boys, yeah, the Beagle Boys and the Huey, Dewey, and Louie.
Uh-huh.
Then let's see. Tintin, excellent, or Tintan, I can't remember what it's called. Excellent comic. Loved it. That would sometimes have an A and a B story, and mostly that would be following Tintin, and maybe it would be following the two police inspectors. And sometimes you would have ones that would follow Tintin, the captain separately, Snowy the dog, and the police inspectors. But it would be pretty limited. It's the A story was, the main one. They really wouldn't branch too far away from that. Everything else would be minimized towards it. So in my comic, in Pinky TA, it's mainly an A story. I have been known to do B stories. I have done it. And it went okay. The most I'll do is an A and a B story, but mainly that was because I thought I had to as a writer. Bottomless Waitress, that's got several threads. You've got a whole bunch of things going there, Baines. I'm not sure how many.
Yeah, more like the model of, I guess, what Seinfeld became. Like you have the Polly story track and the Jane story track and the Francis story track. Yeah, it's basically, that's the idea. I mean, we'll have to wait and see this all take shape and stuff and how it all works out.
Yeah, that's interesting. So, you have the three main characters, and so the A, B, and C story doesn't depend on, okay, so this character gets the, say Seinfeld. All right, Seinfeld as an example. Seinfeld doesn't get the A story always. That would shift between different characters. So maybe
I don't even know if it became, like, it was more like just multiple threads. Like you wouldn't call it the A. I mean, maybe, in some episodes, but definitely later on, it was just 4 stories, and it was just kind of everything. What do you think? Or am I? I'm just talking. Maybe I have no idea what I'm talking about.
No, I would say it was A and B, because they would be in different importance, and they would work together in the end. So you have your main story about, Jerry can't find a parking spot, or he can't find his car. And so we've got like Elaine and George who are together having a chat, and we've got something happening with Kramer and something happening with Jerry, but they're all like different threads and they fit together. So I would call them A and B and C, because they were part of the same story and they did sort of work together. and
Right.
there was a hierarchy to them.
Okay. In a hierarchy in terms of like which story has the most scenes or
Yeah,
the
which
most
is the most
impact,
pivotal to the
most pivotal.
episode.
Right.
So I would think in those terms. So we were talking about Pulp Fiction earlier, which is a great example of A, B, and C stories that are really distinct. You know, those are solid platinum kind of threads there, and they just weave through. Okay, there's this line as it goes there, and then it intersects with this one, and then it goes. It's beautiful in its structure, really, isn't it?
Yeah, it still has an impact on people. Like people see it now. Like as imitated as that movie was,
Yeah.
so many ways, like structure things and the vibe of it and the tone of it and stuff like that. It's still that movie is very powerful still. I think it's 30 years old or something almost.
Yeah.
Yeah, great impact. Just all top to bottom, like really great.
Yeah, with its excellent timeline structure. So it's following different paths on a timeline. We were talking about that before. So the idea is instead of having a very linear story, it sort of goes outside what would be a normal what would be a normal narrative to get a story going. So we have, say, a scene that would drive a story. Okay, like the robbery in a cafe or diner or whatever it was. The robbery in the diner. Normally that would be the main focus of the scene. But the main focus was the ridiculous chat about Royale with cheese, which would normally have been what the characters were talking about before the scene, and it ends just as the scene begins with the robbery, but that's not the case. The main focus is the outside stuff, and the whole movie is like that. The whole movie is about the stuff that happens outside of the proper narrative driven scenes. So like when they're riding around in, you know, the whole thing in the beginning with you know, the shaking down those kids and threatening them with guns and stuff, and then they shoot them. So that's the main scene. But then we've got the other scene of these guys driving this kid around in their car, which would be the scene outside of the stuff. And they're having their inane chat about this and that and that. And of course they accidentally kill him, but yeah, that again, that would have been the main thing, but it wasn't. Yeah, so anyway, I might have gone off topic here, but it's an interesting subject to me anyway.
Definitely, yeah. I mean, the way that's put together is super interesting.
I wouldn't follow that structure for a comic because you bore the shit out of people unless you're a really, really good writer. It's hard to do.
It depends, you know, like, and like this structuring in a web comic. Okay, well, I'll say like how I do mine. I definitely modeled it after like I love Deep Space Nine, and I loved when it was really crackling for me. Was like they'd have an A story and a B story, and I loved it. Their B stories were so great. They were usually a little bit more comedic and a little bit of a different look at the characters, and that was one of the big things that made DS9 special for me. Like, was how they would do that and like what they did with their characters and stuff you were able to explore. Like there'd be some adventure, away mission adventure, and then you'd come back to the station to see the B story, something going on with a couple of the other characters.
That was really.
They were flexible.
Yeah, it was really distinct A and B stories. Like there would almost be labels on them.
Yeah.
Today
it was very. That's true. It was very obvious. It was very concrete. And they would often be, tied together by theme. They would feel coherent,
Oh yeah,
but,
it wasn't bad, and like you say, it was something to look forward to. Who's the A story? Who's the B story focusing on today? We've got the terrible A story with the Vorta and the Changeling and the death that's happening, and then we've got the great B story with Dr. Bashir and the engineer guy, and they're doing their adventure together, or we've got the tailor and Odo having their intrigues together, and you really look forward to those different B stories, don't you? I mean,
big time. Yeah, great stuff. I remember I can think of one example in particular, or a couple, where it's like that the A story is kind of heavy. It's like when I'm rewatching, I'm like, let's get back to the B story about Nog, little Nog wanting to be a Starfleet officer, and he's trying to, like, they're making him count the inventory in the storage room. That's like way more interesting.
Yes.
Or the story where Quark is trying to run some job. He thinks Odo is going to be indisposed. He's like, "Oh, this is my chance to do this criminal thing." And then there's a little
Latinum.
Yeah, like gold pressed Latinum. I love Quark, and so the comedy B story. They were flexible, like the B and the B. What was great about it in that show and others is like the B story can be some quick little scenes. It can be 2 scenes and done, 3 scenes and done, more likely. Or it could be more substantial, it could be a tiny little thing, just as a break from the A story, an emotional break, or just a story break. Or it could be quite involved, where it's almost like which one's the A, which one's the B kind of thing.
Yeah, that did happen a few times, definitely. That's a really good example of how you can use an A and a B story and a C, whatever, to make your overall story more interesting and better. So you're not just following characters, you're not just being a clever, smart-ass writer. You're offering your audience a way to rest and to have a bit of relief.
And anticipate, to allow you to skip some time. That's the real reason for this, for multiple story threads, I think. So to give you a break, and it's a crutch so like people don't get bored, but also, you get to get away, you get to sort of have a cliffhanger. Like, and now we're cutting to something else, and you have to wait.
And a different tone in order to not stress people out.
Totally, yeah. Empire Strikes Back, of course, is a huge, phenomenal movie still, and for its kind of iconic cutting back and forth between the crew, the whole crew of heroes except Luke is on the Falcon being pursued by the Empire. And then Luke goes off and meets Yoda and does his training kind of thing. And we cut back and forth.
Yeah, that's a very well structured film in that aspect. You've got this almost relaxing thing that's happening with Luke in Dagobah in the swamps, and it's very slow paced.
Which would be the B story, I think, huh?
Yeah, well, maybe even a C story, I would say, wouldn't it?
Oh, I would say it's a B for sure. I mean, Luke is like a major, very important component of that movie.
He is, but the story of the Dagobah stuff isn't an important story in that part.
Well, it's him. No, I'd say for sure it's the B story.
I would have thought the B story would have been so we've got all the characters on the Cloud City, right?
Mm-hmm.
But there's different story threads there. With the C-3PO and Chewbacca, and they're following a slightly different story from Han and Leia. So,
they're experiencing. Yeah, I don't know if I would have even call that its own story.
Okay.
Personally,
can't remember it well enough, unfortunately.
This is interesting. I don't know. I wonder if anyone finds this interesting. I'm fascinated by this kind of structured talk.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah, but I would call that the A story, the Empire pursuing the heroes, which is Han and Leia, Chewie and 3PO, on the run, the Empire pursuing, and then the Cloud City, and then finally Han taken away, And the 2 stories cross over at the end.
Yeah, they do. Everything comes together, intersects.
Yeah,
which is...
and I would call Luke's pursuing the more training in the Force as the B story.
Yeah, it's not a
finding out.
Oh, sorry, go on.
And finding out what he finds out, what everybody knows.
No.
Kaiser Soze revelation.
And it's not a complicated story. Star Wars, even Empire Strikes Back, which is the best of the films, isn't a complicated story. It's very simple in structure. Stories don't have to be complicated in structure to work, even with multiple threads. It's done in a standard, simple way, and it's just effective.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of invisible once you figure out the structure stuff. Like, I'm slowly learning that as I try to get better at writing and stuff like that. Like, you figure out this structure, and then it kind of disappears. Of course, you're cutting to a new character or to a new location, so obviously, like, we can notice it and talk about it and stuff like that. But it's kind of like, yeah,
if
it all
it's
works.
good, it disappears. If it's not so good, then it's pretty obvious. Say, we all love. We don't necessarily all love, but many of us do love Lord of the Rings. That was, and I'm not talking about the movie. I'm talking about the original books Tolkien wrote, and they follow A, B, C, D storylines, and that's an example of it not done well. Because your main story is all the characters together, they're all in the same story, and then they split off into different groups. And it comes... How the story develops is that some of the threads are far more interesting than others, and some of them are really not interesting. So you're reading about these characters and you think, wow, this is cool, I want to follow and see what happens next. And then, oh, we're back to Frodo and Sam with their interminable journey across Mordor. And it's just, yeah.
Talking about a quarter pounder in France.
Exactly. Freaking Royale with cheese everywhere. But it's not done well because instead of being, like Seinfeld or whatever, or Deep Space Nine, where you go, okay, let's give the reader, give the viewer a break, give the audience a break, or change the tone or whatever. This ruined the tone, because you're going off in something that's really exciting, like a battle or a developing situation, and then it undercuts by going to something that's just straight into the mud. You're going along on a quite a clip, and it's cool, and you just page turn, and then it's stuck in the mud, bogged, reading about these two characters walking across this horrible blasted wasteland and having a depressing time of it, and you just, oh god, I want to get to these other chapter. Maybe I'll just skip ahead and see what's... Yeah, so even though Lord of the Rings is very loved, it's an example of multiple story threads not done the best. So you can produce something that's really, really good, but not every part of it has to be good.
Right. Sometimes it's just a slog.
Yeah. So, like, say in Deep Space Nine, where it's like we're saying, it's not only interesting threads, but they're there for a reason, and they have different tones for a reason. But say if we went into we were having an exciting gun battle between, I don't know, the Dominion and Klingons or something like this, and it's this fun battleship battle, and then suddenly we cut to something like the modern Picard, some boring, ultra depressing thing that's happening. It would undercut that energy that they built up in the the previous scenes. And you'd lose you'd lose audience interest if they were doing it that way. But they didn't do it that way. They did it more cleverly to not necessarily maintain the same energy, but to augment that energy, or just to give you a break from the stress of that energy, which was, that's a clever way of doing that kind of stuff. Do you know what I mean? Like,
I think so.
It's maintaining.
I can't. Yeah, go ahead.
Maintaining the momentum, so to speak.
Yeah. It's sort of when you cut. Like, that's a whole other aspect of it too, right? Like, when you cut to the other story, where you leave it hanging, and stuff like that. Like, it's all that. There's a craft to that, and that's great stuff.
It really is. So really, we're talking about more than just doing multiple story threads. We're talking about like the reason for it, and also doing it well, and maintaining the momentum of your story and the energy and the interest without destroying it, which you can.
Do you think that the original Star Wars, that's just an A story, right?
I'm pretty sure. Like, for memory, we don't really go outside of that, do we?
Yeah, I would call the subplot, not its own story, but the thematic story. You could call it a B story in a way, but I've always thought of it as that's Luke and the Force. That's like the quote unquote love story. Subplot, thematic plot would be the Force and Luke learning about the Force and the introduction of us to the Force. That's kind of the spiritual thematic thing going on, but it's not a separate story. The A story is like these dudes gather, the kid gathers, and they all go off to save the princess and defeat the villains and stuff like that.
You cannot call it. That's a good point. That main A story. We do have a sort of a separate story with Darth Vader and Grand Moff Tarkin and Princess Leia, but it's not even enough to qualify as a B story, is it?
That's like you're seeing another aspect. It's like third person omniscient point of view or something. You're seeing another aspect of the A story kind of thing.
Yeah,
I would say.
That's a good point.
They have scenes, and like her planet gets destroyed, and like stuff happens, but it's like, yeah, I would call that movie, it's an A story. I could be wrong. I've never really thought about it. It just kind of came to me after.
I think that's right. Yeah. It's just, and it works well. And that's all they need.
Oh, man. The beginning is slow. Even as a kid, I found the beginning on rewatch, the beginning of that movie slow. But it holds up, man.
It is.
Well, it's an A story. It's amazing.
When you've got like an A story like that, it's just following a single path, then the skill in that is to create a certain trajectory of momentum. So they start, it's like Bolero, this music that just goes on, and it follows exactly the same like pattern. Da 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 da. It just follows that same pattern over and over, just getting louder and louder and louder. So in Star Wars, you have this, like, it starts off slow and it goes along like a parabolic curve. We go slow, and then we just ratchet up, and then, almost vertical. So It has this lovely trajectory to follow, and it takes the viewer along with them, along with the story. So you have that like roller coaster ride, like sudden acceleration, boom. And that's what makes it so good. If it just followed like a straight line trajectory, start here, and it wouldn't work so well, because you'd have fatigue, because it's just stress going from here to there. I find those kind of stories very stressful, where they don't ease you into the momentum of it. They just take you straight there, keep on going.
Yeah. That's neat. I love that analogy.
For those kind of stories, you need a B story that gives you a break from it.
Right.
Just to ease it up a bit. Yeah.
Very neat.
Yeah, it's I think it's a good way of thinking of it. It helps to think of these things in an analogous way in order to sort of think about the impact that has on a viewer and to see, you know, how they're going to respond to it. And then you can modify your story in a way that's going to be more, I don't know, pleasant, more kind of viewable.
Yeah, it's not going to be tiring, which a lot of, I mean, you explain it well there, interestingly. I think. I don't completely understand the Bolero aspect. I have to think about that. But
you'll have to listen to Bolero a few times. You know
yeah.
that song, don't you?
Yeah.
Oh, it's
for sure.
Beautiful. The theme famously to the movie 10? No.
Oh, okay.
One of these Bo Derek vehicles.
Yeah.
I can't remember.
Well, not many Bo Derek vehicles are popping to mind. That must be the one.
Yeah, well, it was the famous theme to an early 80s softcore mainstream film. Going off topic there. Yeah, so have you ever found the whole A story, B story stuff like that annoying or unnecessary? I mean, I think I've listed examples myself, but what about you?
I don't think so. I've definitely been frustrated with something that doesn't cut away to something else. Definitely in series. Like I'm watching an episode of something, and it can be like, oh man, this just seems to be going on forever.
Give us a break, man.
I need a story break, or maybe it's an emotional break, like you were kind of getting at, like where it's the kind of, this is just going on, and it's like diminishing returns emotionally. I need to cut away to something else just to rejuvenate or just to have something different.
Yeah.
Definitely had that many times with shows. Trying to think if I've ever felt like there's too many stories or we don't need this. Probably. Nothing's popping into my mind. But.
Oh, I've seen that with the too many stories stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard to bring up specific examples, but
American Horror Story comes to mind.
Oh, really?
The forerunner of Picard, maybe. Yeah. Yeah, it introduces all these stories, and it'll sort of either resolve them or not resolve them, and it's like, wow, it seems like to me you thought of every idea that every writer in the room had, and you had to add that in.
Yeah.
Whether it's a coherent story or not, or whether it ties into anything or not. That seems to be a modern approach to TV writing. In some ways.
Everybody gets their piece and gets it on screen.
Yeah, we touched on everything, even if it was completely unsatisfying. Like we touched on every single thing every single writer ever thought about with a haunted house story. That series is hard to watch for me. As great as the ensemble of actors is and stuff, like it's a frustrating one. Because of the weird way it's written.
Yeah. Well, I find in a lot of sitcoms that very strictly adhere to the A, B, C style in a formula, it can be incredibly frustrating because it's too structured and the structure is too obvious. You know, like you were saying, the when the structure disappears into the story, you don't really notice it, and it works really well. But in some of these things, like I mentioned American Dad, the structure is just so obvious And they don't care. They know it's obvious. They're not trying to be clever. They know this is the A story, B story, C story. But it's just too strict, and it can become frustrating.
Do you notice it? Is that a result? Because this is what it is for me, and I agree with you. Is that a result of the binge watching era? DVDs and now streaming? It's like, I find when I began binge watching things, I would really begin to breathe with the structure of a show. Because you'd see, like, you get in bed and you watch like 4 episodes of the comedy series or whatever.
It does get worse the more you watch, yeah.
The structure really comes to the surface, and you're like, oh wow, like you really start to feel like, okay, I get it. I get the bones of this. The structure of all these episodes, it's like the same, and you can call the beats, even if you're not interested in doing it or whatever. Like, you just like start to feel it in your bones.
Like, I could write this stuff.
Yeah, that is funny. Yeah. It doesn't ruin for me really, but I know what you mean though.
Well, yeah, in some it's just too simplistic, too formulaic. It's interesting that, say like American Dad, I can't remember how many story threads it'll take, but I'm pretty sure there's at least 3 that they'd like to do, maybe 4. Gummy Bears I've been watching over again, which is, a really old 80s Disney animation. And I love it because I grew up with it as a kid. What's that?
Oh. Did you say Gummy Bears?
Yeah, Gummy Bears. I freaking love it.
That's hilarious. I had no idea there were series. Shouldn't be surprised, I guess.
Disney makes series of rides, for God's sake.
Yeah, everything. Yeah.
But yeah, that follows an A and a B story plot. Usually no more than that, but usually always 2. And that's just the limit. That's what they do, always. A and a B. Mm-hmm. And that's interesting. So some things will follow like more than others, and some just will stick to 2. And I think that the reason they do it is because often the episodes were like 15 minutes long, so they're 2 15-minute long episodes put together in 1/2 an hour. So the writers probably thought they didn't have enough time to develop it. And also because it's a simplistic show and it's aimed at kids, so that's probably why they had less threads. But it works.
Yeah.
Like, it's not easy to do multiple threads and say
together. I would, in typical Strange, there was a stretch of time, I'm not sure about the first 2 issues or even 3, but for a lot of it would be an A and a B story modeled after a sitcom or DS9. Like, you have the A story. I would write the whole thing together. Okay, it's this, and this, and here's the cliffhanger, and now we kick off this one. Here's the cliffhanger to the B, and back to the A, and like, not super rigid, but I knew like the A story was going to be the meat of it. And then it had this fun little B story that just a couple of story beats to do. And that was nice, and it kind of went away. I think a good chunk of them have just been a single story.
Oh, interesting. So
when uploading it gets slow, it's like, what's the point of a B story? Like, how about we tell one story, and like, if we can manage that.
Oh yeah, that's interesting. For my latest story of Pinky TA, which has dragged on and on and on, I've sort of tried to do B story with the A, and I don't know whether I'm successful. Maybe it's just like, the Star Wars version of an A story with A story from a different perspective. I'm not sure, but oh well. You do what you do. A pseudo B story.
What you think works, like especially if you have like in the sitcom mold, like you have a bunch of characters, which is what typical Strange is, and like I take them and I haven't done a page in way too long, but so this is all just theoretical right now. But You put them in different combinations and say like, oh, I'd like to see this, I'd like to see that. If it's just an A story, great. If it's an A and a B, I think most of mine is probably A and B. If you have a little idea for a C story, great. Maybe see two characters in an unfamiliar. Put a neat combination of characters together and have a fun little thing with them.
Yeah.
The more structure I do ahead of time, I think, the more likely it is that it's at least A and B, possibly C. I don't think I'd do more than 3. I can't imagine that. Stories aren't long enough.
Yeah, that's a factor. Length. The more I think about it, the more I would want to do that, but have it planned. Most of my stories are sort of more like jazz. It's like improvised on a thread. And then they can go here, they can go there, and it just depends on what I'd like to follow. But it is. I have worked a structure before, and it's an interesting, fun thing, and it's you can create a lot of complexity working to a structure. So it's something I'd like to try more of.
I'd like to go back again too to structuring more before I start posting pages. At least that's what I was thinking before I completely stopped and got a little bit stuck. And, luckily, I had some writers on the Duck help me out with the next issues and stuff like that. Chatterbox is just an A story so far. The next couple will probably be the same. But I do have future stories. Since there's 2 lead characters, there'll definitely be an A-B structure.
Okay.
Either evenly split or one of the other taking the lead, and then the other story being a nice way to have cliffhangers because it's sort of supposed to be an exciting series.
Yeah. There's a lot of scope to fit that stuff in, and it would work very well.
It's like whatever your setup is, whatever your characters are. If you have 1 lead or 2 or an ensemble, like that's gonna. And what tone you're doing, what kind of stories you're telling is going to kind of probably nudge you in a direction of how do I do this? Is it just one story and we see everyone's reaction to the events, or is it A, B, A, B, C?
Yeah, or are we? Exactly.
It's
are
cool.
we following
I love it.
different threads? Yeah, when you have an ensemble cast, it's rewarding to follow. Because people have often favorite characters, so it really is a reward to your audience to give them more of those characters, more of their life, so let them in on what these characters are doing, and take them over onto the ones you really want them to follow.
That makes me wish I was doing more pages more quickly so I could try to serve that. Because I do agree with you. But it's kind of
get you writing sitcoms.
Yeah, you got to crank these things out, man.
Wishful thinking.
I really like the movie Crimes and Misdemeanors.
Okay.
Have you seen that movie with the Woody Allen movie? Martin Landau is the star.
I have not actually. It's weird.
It's very good. It's very strong. It's got an interesting A-B structure with basically 2 pretty much evenly split. The Martin Landau story is probably, I want to say it's got more. I'm not sure, but it's the more serious story. And then the Woody Allen story is the more comedic. And that's a very interesting structure where you see these 2 stories playing out. You cut back and forth between them. And then the 2 characters meet for the first time, like in the last scene of the movie. Very interesting. And great movie.
That sounds good. I want to try that. I want to test that one out now. I'll have a look for some great Woody Allen stuff.
Well, it's that one in particular. He doesn't do everything that way, but it's Crimes and Misdemeanors is that kind of.
Oh yeah, that particular structure. All right, that is a classic, and it's a classic that I have to experience.
It's very deep and dark.
Oh.
Maybe, I don't know. Maybe it sucks. It's been a long time. No, it's a great movie. Really. Very, very
Well,
hey, we did it.
What's that?
This hour went by quickly, actually.
It did. Oh, well, we'll have to wrap that up. Thank you very much for listening to QUACKCAST 589. I've been Ozone Ocean, and Baines has been fantastic.
Yes, thank you.
And sorry we didn't get to the B story. But
let's cut to the B stories and see what's happening with Pitt. She's in the grocery store and she's shoplifting, it looks like.
Again.
Yeah. Not good. All right. Get the bail money. To call the cop. You call store security and I'll call the bondsman. I don't know. And Tent is being attacked by wild dogs in her living room. I think she's okay. She's not moving.
Tune in next week to see what happens.
Hooray!
All right. Goodbye, people.
Bye. Thank you.